You see, this unusual act of piracy, which is being denounced today at the United Nations Council, has drawn considerable attention. The Security Council is giving its overwhelming support to Venezuela and to the important right to free navigation, as well as to free trade.
Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro says his government is gaining strong backing at the United Nations amid rising tensions with the United States. Maduro claimed that the UN Security Council showed overwhelming support for Venezuela's sovereignty and its right to free navigation and trade. His remarks followed an emergency Security Council meeting requested by Caracas over U.S. military activity near Venezuelan waters. The session marked the second UN debate on the issue since October, highlighting growing international concern over the dispute. Washington has maintained a military deployment in the region and recently seized vessels transporting Venezuelan crude oil. Maduro described the U.S. actions as piracy, insisting they violate international law and threaten global trade routes. Speaking at a trade fair in Caracas, he said no external power would be able to defeat or intimidate Venezuela.
You see, this unusual act of piracy, which is being denounced today at the United Nations Council, has drawn considerable attention. The Security Council is giving its overwhelming support to Venezuela and to the important right to free navigation, as well as to free trade. And there is Chevron, an American company, which is an example of how what is signed in Venezuela is guaranteed by our law, our Constitution. And we, come rain, thunder, or lightning, will continue to honor all signed contracts, not just in oil, but in everything, telecommunications, tourism, because Venezuela has decided to take off in the 21st century toward its own growth and the comprehensive development of its economy. It has emerged with its own strength, which we don't owe to anyone. I don't owe a cent to anyone. We don't owe anything to anyone. On the contrary, it's others who owe us. And any disturbance or disruption that might possibly arise, will it in fact be dealt with appropriately? And with God's favor, singing our mantra, God will provide, God will provide, God will provide, God will give us the solutions together with the people. And every disturbance will be faced, resolved, and overcome. Any disturbance or disruption that may potentially arise in order to perfect and further improve the economic system of the 14 engines, to perfect and enhance the system of independent and sovereign economic prosperity. From Venezuela.
The United States rejected those claims at the UN, vowing to enforce sanctions to the maximum extent possible. U.S. officials said the measures aim to cut off financial resources to Maduro's government. Russia strongly criticized Washington's approach, warning that other Latin American nations could face similar pressure. Moscow accused the United States of abusing sanctions as a political weapon beyond its borders. China also voiced support for Venezuela, reinforcing divisions among major powers inside the Security Council. Caracas argues the oil seizures are part of a broader campaign to economically strangle the country. With tensions escalating, Venezuela says it will continue seeking international backing to counter U.S. pressure.
I now give the floor to the first distinguished representative, the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, on behalf of the group of friends in defense of the Charter to the UN.
Señora Presidenta.
Madam President, the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela has the honor to take the floor on behalf of the group of friends in defense of the Charter of the United Nations. And we welcome the convening of this high-level meeting in accordance with the resolution sponsored by our group and adopted by the vast majority of the international community. Madam President, 65 years ago, this General Assembly proclaimed that all peoples have the right to self-determination, and that the subjection of peoples to alien subjugation, domination, and exploitation constitutes a denial of fundamental human rights. That declaration on the granting of independence to colonial countries and peoples helped many trust territories and non-self-governing territories to attain independence and join this organization. However, 70 non-self-governing territories and others which have not yet attained independence in accordance with Resolution 1514, including Palestine and Puerto Rico, still await the full realization of their inalienable rights. We therefore reiterate our unwavering adherence to that historic declaration to the purposes and principles of the UN Charter, including sovereign equality, non-interference in the internal affairs of states, and the inalienable right of all peoples to self-determination. This General Assembly has recognized that the continuing forms of colonialism is incompatible, in all of its forms of manifestations, incompatible with the Charter of the UN, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and the Declaration on the Granting of Independence to Colonial Countries and Peoples, as it impedes social, cultural, and economic development and undermines the United Nations ideal of universal peace. At present, colonial domination operates through more subtle but equally pernicious methods. These include economic coercion and the unfair use of structural power in global finance and trade, the application of illegal unilateral coercive measures that inflict collective punishment and seek to dictate the sovereign choices of peoples, conditions attached to development assistance and lending that erodes policy space and entrench dependency, illicit or exploitative appropriation of natural resources, restriction on access to markets and services, particularly to technologies, humanitarian goods, and medical equipment, interference in internal affairs, including electoral processes and information spaces, as well as the instrumentalization of human rights through country-specific mechanisms established without the due consent of the state concerned. Many members of our grouping know from direct experience how media campaigns, financial pressure, unilateral coercive measures, and politicized use of international institutions can be used to destabilize sovereign states whose only fault is to pursue independence. These are contemporary avenues of colonialism and neocolonialism. We reiterate our solidarity with all of those who are living under the subjugation of foreign domination, including non-self-governing territories. We encourage the occupying powers to respect the inalienable rights of peoples in these territories under their responsibility, respect of their land and their natural resources. They must respect this. They must abstain for economic and military activities that violate these rights. They should not alter the demographics, and they must take up and assume their responsibility over the economic and social cultural responsibility through reparations. Today, the member states of our grouping reaffirmed that the existence of colonialism in all of its forms and manifestations is incompatible with the Charter of the United Nations and must end. We condemn the crimes committed during the colonial era and the modern practices that perpetuate this domination and inequality and that seek to limit sovereignty and independence. Madam President, a world free of colonialism is one where every nation, large or small, can choose its own path without fear, coercion, or tutelage, where independence is not just a legal status, but a lived reality of political, economic, and cultural sovereignty. Madam President, allow me now to deliver a few remarks in my national capacity. On the 16th of December of this year, the President of the United States of America announced to the world that Venezuelan lands and oil belong to it, and that they should be handed over immediately. And if these orders were not followed, the most powerful navy in history would proceed to blockade all of Venezuela by land and sea. By this public confession of this criminal act, the President of the United States of America intends to turn back the clock of history some 200 years to transform Venezuela into a colony. There is no legal instrument that holds up in the face of this monstrous declaration. Not the Charter of the United Nations, customary international law, the resolutions of the Security Council and the General Assembly, the jurisprudence and case history of international courts, the Convention of the Law on the Law of the Sea. This is a hideous violation of all norms of civilization. This is what colonialism is, a crime of aggression. The United States of America are imposing chaos and destruction on international relations in the same way that nefarious actors did worldwide in the Second World War. Gunboat diplomacy has no place in the 21st century. The Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela will defend its sovereignty and territorial integrity and independence wherever necessary in order to maintain the peace and security of the nation and to restore international norms. The scourge of colonialism is still here, and it must be toppled for the protection of all peoples of the world. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela.